The day Harlan Pruett signed that piece of paper, the man across the desk laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite smile. A full laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in the chest. The kind that says, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. Son, said Roland Vance, leaning back in his leather chair like he owned the air in the room, which, in a way, he did. That lot hasn't moved in 4 years. The equipment on it is older than your mother. You sure you want to spend your last $1,000 on something I couldn't even give away? Harlan was 22 years old. He had $1,000 in a bank account he'd been building since he was 16. Stacking bills from lawn mowing jobs and gas station shifts, and one brutal winter delivering packages in a van with no heat. He had no college degree, no family money, no connections worth calling. What he had was a piece of paper that said he now owned a rusted-out equipment yard on the edge of Dellwood, Georgia. Half an acre of broken-down landscaping machines, dead mowers, cracked tillers, and one tractor that looked like it had survived a war it hadn't won. He took the paper, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket. Yeah, Harlan said. I'm sure. Vance shook his head, still smiling. Good luck to you. He said it the way people say it when they don't mean it at all. Dellwood wasn't a big town. Population under 8,000. One main street, 2 traffic lights, a diner called Patsy's that served the same breakfast menu it had in 1987. Harlan had grown up on Clifton Road, 3rd house from the end, in a 2-bedroom house he shared with his grandmother, Estelle, and his younger cousin Devon, who was 15 and still figuring out what kind of person he wanted to be. Estelle had raised Harlan since he was 9. After his mother moved to Atlanta for work and stopped coming back for weekends. She was 67 now, moved slower than she used to, and had a habit of sitting on the porch in the early mornings with her coffee, watching the light come up over the tree line. When Harlan told her what he'd done with his savings, she was quiet for a long time. That Vance property? She finally said. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. People been saying that land is cursed. People said the same thing about the old Mercer building before somebody turned it into a restaurant. Estelle made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite disagreement. Then she said, You eat something before you go out there. That was her version of blessing it. The first time Harlan walked the lot alone, he almost turned around. The grass had grown up through the equipment. Vines had worked their way into engine blocks. A push mower near the back fence had a tree. Not a sapling, an actual tree, growing straight up through the deck. The tractor sat at the center of everything like a monument to giving up, its cab cracked open, its seat rotted to nothing, the rust eating through the hood in patterns that almost looked deliberate. He stood there in the October chill and did the math in his head. He had no money left. He had a rusted-out lot. He had a truck, a basic set of hand tools, and about 14 hours a week outside of his job at the distribution warehouse on Route 9, where he worked the overnight shift 4 days a week loading freight. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of the tractor, then another. Then he walked the whole lot and photographed everything, every broken machine, every cracked housing, every stripped bolt and missing blade. He made a list, not a wish list, a real list. What could be repaired? What could be parted out? What could be scrapped for metal? What, if anything, had value that nobody had thought to see? He went home. He didn't sleep. He built a spreadsheet on his laptop until 5 in the morning. The people in Dellwood had opinions about it. They always did. Bert Colson, who ran the hardware store on Main and had an opinion about everything in a 30-mile radius, told anyone who'd listen that the Pruett boy had gotten taken for a fool. Vance ran the numbers on that property years ago, Bert said, leaning on his counter like a man settling in for a long story. There's nothing there. The equipment is too old and too far gone to be worth fixing, and the land itself isn't zoned for anything useful. Kid spent his whole savings on a headache. Down at Patsy's diner, 2 of the older men who had breakfast there every morning, Dewey and Cal, who Harlan had known his whole life, had a shorter version of the same conversation. Shame, Dewey said. Said Cal. That was about the full extent of it. His coworker at the warehouse, a big man named Terrence Hobbs, who'd worked the overnight shift for 11 years and had strong feelings about most things, put it more directly. You bought what? Equipment lot, Harlan said, loading a pallet. From Vance? From Vance. Terrence was quiet for a moment. Then, that man sold you a graveyard, Harlan. Maybe. Or maybe I bought a parts store. Terrence looked at him like he'd said something in a language he didn't speak. Then he shrugged and went back to work. Harlan started on a Saturday. He woke up at 6, ate the eggs Estelle left covered on the stove, drove the 8 minutes to the lot, and began. No music, no podcast. Just the sound of tools on metal and the occasional car passing on the road outside the chain-link fence. The first machine he touched was a commercial zero-turn mower, a Husqvarna, probably 10 years old, with a cracked deck and a seized engine. He spent 4 hours on the engine alone, pulling it apart piece by piece, cleaning, assessing. The carburetor was savable. The blades were in better shape than they looked. The deck crack was ugly but structural, and with the right weld and a patch plate, it would hold. He didn't have a welder. He borrowed one from his neighbor, Mr. Otis, a retired machinist who'd been welding since before Harlan was born and who asked no questions and offered no opinions, just handed over the machine with a nod and said, "Bring it back with a full tank." By the end of that first Saturday, Harlan had one mower with a working engine, a patched deck, and new blades sourced from a second mower that was too far gone to save. It wasn't pretty, but it ran. He listed it online that evening. By Tuesday, it had sold. $340. He stood in the lot the afternoon the buyer came to pick it up. A landscaping contractor from 3 towns over named Philip Dana, who walked around the mower twice, got down on one knee to look at the deck, then stood up and said, "This is solid work." "Thank you," Harlan said. "You do this full-time?" "Not yet." Philip nodded slowly, like he was filing that away somewhere. "What's your name?" "Harlan Pruett. I might call you again, Harlan Pruett." He left with the mower in the back of his trailer. Harlan watched him go, then looked back at the lot, at the 14 machines still sitting in the weeds, and felt something shift in his chest. Not excitement, not yet. Something quieter than that. Something that felt more like direction. The thing about rebuilding equipment is that it teaches you to see differently. Most people look at a broken machine and see what's wrong. Harlan learned to look at it and see what's salvageable, what's scarce, what someone 3 states away might be searching for on a parts forum at midnight, because their commercial mower is down, and they need a specific spindle assembly that hasn't been manufactured since 2009. That was the education, and it cost him nothing but time. By December, 2 months in, he had moved 9 machines, some repaired and resold whole, some broken down for parts, listed individually on 3 different platforms, shipped in flat-rate boxes from the post office on Oak Street, where the woman behind the counter started recognizing him and stopped asking him what was in the boxes. He reinvested every dollar. A better set of wrenches, a parts washer, a used engine hoist he found at an estate sale for $60. A proper work light so he could stay later into the evenings when the sun went down before 5. He hadn't told anyone what the numbers looked like. Not because he was secretive, because they weren't big yet, and he'd learned a long time ago that small things grow better in quiet. Christmas came. Estelle made her usual spread. Ham, cornbread, sweet potatoes, a sweet potato pie that she'd been making the same way since before Harlan could walk. Devon ate like it might be taken from him. Harlan ate slowly, sitting at the table with his grandmother after Devon had gone to bed. Just the 2 of them with the kitchen smelling like sugar and something old and good. "How's the lot?" Estelle asked. "Getting better," Harlan said. "You sleeping enough?" "Mostly." She watched him for a moment. That Vance called Bert Colson, apparently. Said he heard somebody was actually doing something with that property. Colson told him he thought it wouldn't last. Harlan smiled into his plate. You're not worried about what people think." It wasn't a question. She knew the answer. "No, ma'am," he said. Estelle nodded once, slow, and reached over and patted his hand the way she'd done since he was small, when things were hard and she wanted him to know she saw him. "Good," she said. "Keep going." January was cold. Colder than Dellwood usually got, with a freeze that came in the second week and didn't leave. The lot was brutal to work in. His hands cracked. His breath fogged in the air. He bought a propane heater and set it inside the tractor cab, which he'd cleaned out and converted into a rough sort of workspace. Not warm, exactly, but survivable. The tractor itself had become something of a project. A 1974 Ford 3000, the kind of machine that, in the right condition, small farms would pay serious money for. In its current condition, it was a teaching tool. He spent Saturdays on it like other people spend Saturdays on crossword puzzles, methodically, persistently, one piece at a time. He'd found a community online, forums, groups, old-timers, who'd been restoring vintage iron for 40 years and were generous with knowledge in the way that people become when they love something and want to see it survive. He posted questions with photographs. He got answers. He learned. In February, Philip Dana, the landscaping contractor who'd bought the first mower, called back. "I've got a Skag sitting in my yard that's been dead for 2 seasons, Philip said. "My regular mechanic retired. I've had 2 other guys look at it. Nobody can figure out the electrical issue. You want to take a crack at it?" "Drop it off," Harlan said. Philip laughed. "Just like that? Just like that?" He found the problem in 40 minutes. A corroded ground strap hidden behind the frame, creating an intermittent short that had apparently defeated 2 professional mechanics. He fixed it in 20. Philip picked it up 2 days later and stood there looking at the machine running clean and smooth. "What do I owe you?" Harlan named a number. Philip wrote a check without negotiating. At the door of the lot, he turned around. "You taking other repair work?" "Starting to," Harlan said. Word moves fast in small towns, especially good word. Philip Dana told someone who told someone else, and by March, Harlan had a waiting list for repair work. Farmers, landscapers, a municipal parks department from the next county over that had 3 broken mowers it needed back before spring maintenance season started. He hired Devin. His cousin was 16 by then, and the deal was simple. Show up on time, do exactly what he was told. And the pay was $12 an hour, which was more than the grocery store was offering. Devin agreed with the kind of enthusiasm that 16-year-olds produce when money is involved, and showed up that first Saturday in a hoodie and work boots, looking uncertain. "What do I do?" Devin asked, standing in the lot. "Come here," Harlan said. He spent the morning teaching Devin how to clean a carburetor. Not why, not the theory, just the process step by step, the same way Harlan had taught himself. Hands-on, tools in hand, making mistakes and fixing them. By noon, Devin had cleaned 3 carburetors. By the end of the day, he'd stopped looking uncertain. By June, he was working 20 hours a week and starting to diagnose simple problems on his own, coming to Harlan with questions that were getting more specific, more technical, better. Estelle watched Devin come home from the lot one evening, hands still gritty despite the washing, talking about an engine problem he'd figured out, and she sat in her chair on the porch and didn't say anything for a long time. Later, when Devin was inside, she said to Harlan, "You did that. Devin did that," Harlan said. She shook her head. "Don't argue with your grandmother." By July, 9 months after Harlan signed that piece of paper in Roland Vance's office, the lot was unrecognizable. The grass was cut. The fencing had been repaired. A hand-painted sign stood at the entrance. Nothing fancy, just the name he'd registered with the county 3 months earlier, Pruett Equipment and Repair. Inside, machines sat in organized rows, some in for repair, some restored and waiting for buyers, some disassembled for parts laid out on shelves he'd built from lumber and concrete blocks. The tractor, the 1974 Ford 3000 that had sat rusting at the center of the lot like a monument to giving up, was done. 14 months of Saturdays and late evenings and forum threads and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It ran. Not just ran, it ran right, the engine smooth and even, the hydraulics responsive, the restored blue paint catching the summer light. He listed it at $8,500. It sold in 4 days. A retired farmer outside Savannah who'd had a Ford 3000 when he was young and always wanted another. He drove down with his son to pick it up, walked around it twice, then just stood there looking at it for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with money. "My daddy had one of these," the man said. "Yes, sir," Harlan said. "You did good work, son." It wasn't the $8,500 that stayed with Harlan. It was that moment. He ran into Roland Vance September. It happened at the county equipment auction, an annual event that Harlan had started attending in the spring to source machines. He was standing in the lot examining a commercial aerator when he heard the voice. "Well, Harlan Pruett." He turned. Vance was there with two other men in collared shirts, all of them holding paper auction catalogs. Vance looked the same, easy smile, shoulders back, the posture of a man who'd never had to think too hard about where his next dollar was coming from. "Mr. Vance," Harlan said, "I heard you've been doing something with that property." Vance glanced at the aerator. Harlan was inspecting. "Bert Colson mentioned it. Said you got a little shop going, something like that." Vance nodded slowly. "Good for you, good for you." He said it with a tone that was almost, not quite but almost, the same tone he'd used the day he'd laughed. Harlan looked at him for a moment, not with anger, not with the need to explain himself or prove anything. Just looked at him the way you look at a road you used to think was the only way and then realized wasn't. "Have a good auction," Harlan said, and went back to examining the aerator. He bought it for $180. He sold it, repaired and reconditioned 6 weeks later for $640. By the end of that first year, Pruett Equipment and Repair had generated just over $94,000 in revenue. Not profit, revenue. The expenses were real. Parts, tools, the insurance he'd gotten in May, the business license, Devon's wages, the metal shelving he'd finally bought to replace the concrete blocks. But the profit was there, real and documented, sitting in a business account he'd opened at the credit union on Fairview Street. He didn't celebrate. Estelle made dinner, same as always. Devon ate too much, same as always. Harlan sat at the table and felt something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite relief. Something in between, something steadier than either. He had a wait list of 47 repair customers. He had relationships with 6 landscaping companies, 3 farms, and a parks department. He had a 16-year-old cousin who could diagnose a fuel delivery problem without being told. He had a lot that, 11 months ago, a man in a leather chair had laughed about. He had a plan for the second year that was bigger than the first one. Some people hear a story like this and think the point is the money. It isn't. Money came because the work was real, and the work was real because the seeing was real. The ability to look at something broken and find what was worth saving. Some people hear a story like this and think the point is proving people wrong. That's closer, but still not it. Harlan Pruett didn't lie awake thinking about Bert Colson or Roland Vance or what Terrence Hobbs said about graveyards. He lay awake thinking about the 1968 Oliver tractor he'd seen listed 3 counties over, and whether the hydraulic system could be rebuilt, and what it might be worth to the right buyer. The point, if there is one and there might not need to be, is simpler than all of that. It's that a lot of what gets called worthless is only called worthless because the person deciding didn't have the patience to look harder. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look, willing to work, willing to stay in the cold with cracked hands and a propane heater and a borrowed welder until the thing runs right. There's a lot of land in this world that people have been laughing about for years. Somebody ought to go buy it.